One of our guests of the day, the other one today, is a man you may recognise, or maybe you don't. Jordan Peterson has achieved that rare feat, becoming a global superstar academic. So how did he become so well known? He first came to national prominence in Canada in 2016 in a debate about new laws on gender identity. Bill C-16 made it an offence to refuse to call someone by their chosen gender pronoun. Jordan Peterson argued that this would infringe free speech, while some supporters of the bill said he was advocating prejudice. From there, his YouTube star took off, and he has now over 1 million subscribers. And his videos, where he talks everything from identity politics, which we've touched on, to the Bible, to Disney movies, have been viewed over 150 million times. Gosh, that's about the same number of viewers we have on this programme. Last year, he supported ex-Google employee James Damore, who had been fired for suggesting men and women have different interests due to biological differences. And his latest book, 12 Rules for Life, has taken him on a global tour promoting his ideas, and just this week he sold out the 1,000-seater Emmanuel Centre around the corner here in Westminster. So Jordan, you've done endless interviews, you've been publicising your book, and they've generated plenty of heated debate.
No, I actually sold out the Apollo. It had 5,000 seats.
All right, stop boasting. Do you think, though, because of the heat that has been generated, that your views have been misrepresented at times?
Oh, definitely, but that's, you know, that's part and parcel of the process. I did take a very forceful stance, let's say, against some of the excesses of the radical left-wingers, and it's in their best interest to paint me as somehow a figure of the extreme right, because then I don't have to be contended with. But, I mean, it's easy for people's views to be oversimplified in a very large public debate.
I mean, in terms of some of the issues, I mean, you say you've been painted as an extreme right-winger.
No, some people have tried that. Not very successfully, but they've tried it.
And you came to prominence in part over your opposition to this law that we just talked about in Canada, proposing the use of preferred pronouns for transgender people. Just for clarity.
Mandating them.
Yeah.
Right.
Saying that you should do it.
No, that you had to do it.
Right, you had to do it by law. But just for clarity, do you think a trans woman is a real woman?
I don't really like the way those questions are formulated. You know, I don't know what that means. What do you mean a real woman?
Well, I'm asking you, in your mind, you know, it depends what you think a real woman is, but do you think a trans woman is a woman?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and I think the biological markers are relevant. It doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think that people should be treated with respect and dignity if they happen not to fit easily into a gender category. That's a different issue.
Right.
But it's a matter of definition. And I actually think it's a foolish argument in some sense. Because what do you mean by real?
Well, I mean, you've just clarified that, though. You don't think that a trans woman is a woman. And do you think that that is what is behind or explains your opposition to this idea of a law mandating you to use a preferred pronoun, is because you don't actually believe that that's the truth, that a trans woman is a woman and therefore you can't use that pronoun?
No, that's not my argument at all.
Really?
Yeah, really. My argument is that the government shouldn't compel voluntary speech.
No, but I know what your argument is, and
no,
you've made it very clearly.
But that's exactly it. There's no
motivation
behind it.
But you don't believe
I wouldn't have put
is
everything on my online in my life to take the stance I did unless I had thought that through very deeply. And I've thought it through very deeply. There aren't hidden motivations that have to do with some arbitrary prejudice against trans people.
Okay.
It's pure and simply this. There's never been a time in English common law history where the government compelled speech, and the Canadian government dared to do that. And that was unacceptable. And they masked it with this show of compassion for the oppressed, and I don't buy it.
Right, but you would, as I think you've said, at an individual level, if somebody asked you to use a particular pronoun, you would do so.
Well, I have.
You have?
Yes.
Right, fine.
Yes.
Let's talk about feminism. Are you a feminist?
No, not as it's currently defined, certainly not.
No, well, in any other definition?
Well, I think that anybody who doesn't think that the competitive landscape should be opened up for equality of opportunity is not thinking. And so everyone's interests are better served if people have as equal access to opportunity to display their talents and to manifest their talents in the world as possible. So in that sense, certainly. But feminism now, as far, and this is why it's so deeply unpopular, a very small minority of women in the UK identify as feminists. And the reason for that is it's primarily become an ideological weapon. And it's an ideology that I detest, actually, the ideology that it's associated with, collectivist ideology.
Right. I mean, OK, and that's your view about feminism. Aisha, are you a feminist?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a very proud feminist. And when I was a special advisor in government, I worked on women and equality issues, and I was very proud actually of a piece of legislation I got on the statute book with my former boss Harriet Harman, the Equality Act in 2010, which strengthened our anti-discrimination laws. And I fought very hard to get more women into public life, into the Labour Party, and I'm very, very proud of being a feminist, hence my pink dress.
Oh, well, all right. Obviously reverting to type then in the pink dress.
Absolutely, well.
You would like men to regain or reclaim their strength physically, mentally and morally. Is that broadly correct?
I would say morally, fundamentally, but I think the other things go along with that.
Right, and if that
But it isn't men precisely who I'm speaking to. It's people. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm actually interested in individuals, and I'm interested in their fortification against tragedy. You know, every time I do an interview, the interview is always political. It's always political.
Well, the clue is in the title of this programme. We are the Daily Politics.
No, fair enough. No, look, fair enough. And I'm not casting aspersions at this programme, but the fundamental news that's important about what I'm doing isn't the political element. And the people who talk to me don't talk politically. They say they've watched my lectures.
But part of it is that I think for a lot of people the kind of personal does become the political.
Or the political becomes the personal.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the...
but in this situation, a lot of people are wrong, because primarily what's happening is people are watching my lectures, and as a consequence, their lives are improving dramatically.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I'm sure people are have had a huge conversion after, and they're much happier once they've been.
It's not a conversion.
But what I would like to do is kind of almost... I think at the moment the discussion about feminism is very divisive, and sometimes it can sort of be like, OK, men have to lose and women have to gain. Actually, everybody has a lot to gain by greater equality. Now, whether you get the equality of outcome that you want, I think only time will tell. But certainly, equality of opportunity is very important. And actually,
we can agree on that.
And a lot of men would benefit from that. So I think a lot of men are having a lot of crises at the moment in terms of mental health, suicide issues, their own sense of identity, because I think some of the stereotypes put on men are quite limiting for them as well. I think they make men quite unhappy as well.
The devil's in the details with regards to equality, because I'm an advocate of equality of opportunity. But I think the idea outcomes, that's an appalling doctrine.
Why?
All right. Well,
because you have to produce an unbelievably potent bureaucracy to make the ever greater and ever finer distinctions that are necessary to enforce equality of outcome. How many group differences are you going to equalize across? Is it just gender and sex? How many genders?
No,
gender and ethnicity? How many genders?
I think
how many ethnicities? How many races?
We'll let Aisha answer.
I think what people are trying to do with this, and certainly as somebody who has sought to sort of do this myself, I think you set yourself ambitions for what you would like to see, and then you try and remove as many of the structural barriers and obstacles. So you try and create that fair crack of the whip and that equality of opportunity to see where you get to with the outcomes.
That's
now,
fine.
We are in very early stages. It's only 100 years since women got the vote in this country. We have had a long established patriarchal society and set up for a long time in the world, in this country. So I think we have a long way to go to see where it plays out. There is no country in the world where we really do have gender equality properly yet in terms of real decision making and real
some of the
power.
Scandinavian countries maybe,
but they're still not quite there, and I think you've spoken a lot about this. There's still a way to go in Scandinavia. Things are not perfect in Scandinavia.
I haven't spoken about that specifically. I've spoken about
you spoke about the right stuff yesterday. You talked about the Scandinavian.
Well, I've spoken about the fact that, see, one of the things that's happened in the analysis of the differences between men and women is that the social constructionist claim is that the differences are socially constructed, right? Is that it's a consequence of environment that men and women differ. But what the scientific literature indicates is that as cultures become more egalitarian, like they have in Scandinavia, the differences between men and women actually increase rather than decreasing, which is a direct repost to the social constructionist view. So they just deny all that. The biggest differences in the world in interest and temperament are between Scandinavian men and women. It's exactly the opposite of what everyone predicted.
Can I just pick up on one thing you said a little earlier in the interview, which you said it's the moral guidance that you are focused on. You think that is particularly important. How do you square that with the behaviour of perhaps arguably, you know, a prominent alpha male president of the United States, Donald Trump? When his behaviour, I mean, he is accused of having an affair with a porn star when his wife was pregnant. How does that fit with morally reclaiming?
Well, I would say that was rather clearly immoral.
Right.
Yeah,
but you would
not
still,
to be a target for emulation.
But you still would have voted for him over Hillary Clinton as an identity politics. I mean, it's just how
none of
do
that
you
was
win
on
the
the table, and I said I might have voted for him on a whim. That's all.
But you also did say you started out feeling quite close to Hillary Clinton. Can I just come on the
very quickly, because we've got to move on.
In a way, I don't care what Trump does in terms of his private life, but what I don't have is him stopping or potentially stopping other women having agency over their reproductive rights, and lots of men taking those decisions.
It's all about where the moral outrage lies, and what's more morally outrageous in people's eyes. Is it his behaviour or the identity politics for you on the... Anyway, we'll have to discuss this another time.
Jace, what do you think?